Okay, now let us understand how Hibernate handles concurrent access. What do I mean by concurrent access? Now we have a database table, and inside database, let's assume that two transactions are working on same rows, right? Means two transactions are trying to access the same row inside database table concurrently. Now there are some concurrency issues. What are the issues? Isolation. We have to isolate. Whenever there are concurrency issues, we have to isolate each transaction. Each transaction has ACID properties, right? Atomicity, consistent, isolation, durability. So we have to make sure that each transaction is isolated from other transactions. So let's assume that there are two transactions, transaction 1 and transaction 2. Each transaction should feel as if this is the only one which is acting on that particular data. Even though two transactions are sharing or working on the same set of rows in the database, each transaction should feel that it is the only transaction which is working on that data. So isolation can be implemented by using locking on database rows. We can take lock on the database rows. Now let us see how Hibernate handles it. Okay. There are a lot of transaction isolation issues, like last update issue, dirty read issue, and also unrepeatable read, and also phantom read. Means these are various anomalies, transaction anomalies which are found in our applications, like last update, dirty read, and also repeatable read and phantom read. We are not going to discuss about what are different types of isolation issues possible, but just understand these are the 4 types of isolation issues which are most common in any database applications. This is something related to database. We are not going to just we are not going to look in detail about all this. Just understand this is one problem. Last update problem is one problem. Dirty read is one problem, and also unrepeatable read and phantom read. These are the 4 problems which can occur when more than one transaction is concurrently using the same data set, right? Now generally in databases, first of all, forget about Hibernate for some time. To avoid these transaction issues, what we have to do is we have to configure the database to one isolation levels. There are 4 isolation levels possible. The isolation level, first isolation level is read uncommitted isolation. This isolation level avoids some of the concurrency issues, but some concurrency issues will be still present. And similarly, read committed isolation, repeatable read isolation, and serializable isolation. These are the 4 isolation levels. These are not very particular to Hibernate. These all are related to database concepts. These are all database concepts. So these we are not going to understand. Just understand that there are 4 isolation levels. What are they? Read uncommitted isolation level, read committed isolation level, repeatable read isolation level, serializable isolation level. What do I mean by isolation levels? Okay, if you try to understand isolation levels, what do I mean by first isolation? Each transaction should be isolated from each other. Even though there are 2 or more transactions, each transaction should feel that it is the only one which is working on the data set, right? So isolation can be achieved through locking, right? But locking comes up with a performance penalty. If you go and take locking only for each transaction, performance will be badly affected, right? So you should be intelligently deciding when a lock is really needed and when a lock is not really needed. But still you have to make sure that transactions are isolated, right? So the database administrators, they know very well, your database administrator will be very well knowing about your application, and he can decide, he will be the good person, best person to decide which isolation level to use. if I am using one of the isolation level, if I configure isolation level on the database side, not on Hibernate side, isolation level has to be configured on database level, right? If you are making, if you are configuring one of the isolation level, each isolation level will avoid some of the problems, but still will contain some of the problems, right? You have to choose one of the best isolation level according to your application requirements. Suppose if your application is having only read data, if your application is only reading, if your application is not going to write anything, right, then better to use repeatable read annotation, right, repeatable read isolation. So like that, your database administrator will be deciding which isolation level to use. As per Hibernate, we just have to understand how to configure isolation levels in Hibernate. That's all, right? Among all the isolation levels, the best isolation level which will be commonly used is read committed isolation level, right? There are 4 isolation levels. Among all, the most commonly used and which is performance effective is read committed isolation level, right? How to configure it in our Hibernate? See, we have to configure something like a property called hibernate.connection.isolation is equals to, you have to give one value. 1 means read uncommitted isolation, 2 means read committed isolation, 4 means read repeatable read isolation, 8 means serializable. You just have to understand how to configure this property and what are the values. We are not going to discuss about these isolations, right? This is the value. This is the one how we configure isolations, right? Then again, coming back to concurrency control, I'll talk with an example. Let's assume you are making online reservation. Now, you two users are trying to book a ticket in a bus. Let's assume only one seat is empty. Number 10 seat number 10 is empty. Both of you are trying to reserve. So first what you will do, you will first query what all seats are available. It will show the empty seats. Now for both of you, it has showed seat number 10 as empty. At the same time you are firing concurrently. So whenever you search for seats, it fired a select query which said seat number 10 is empty. The application showed seat number 10 is empty for both of you. Now what will happen? First let's assume that this user has processed his credit card details first and then committed it. Then the seat will be reserved for him. Then after some time he will also give the credit card details and commit it. Then what should happen? It should say that the seat is already reserved, right? Okay, now see this example. There are 2 conversations starting parallelly, conversation A, conversation B. Both of the conversation have fired the same select query. They got the results, dataset 1, right? Then conversation A will fire an update which is updating the same dataset with some new values. After some time, after this is committed, then conversation B is again firing an update on same dataset because both of them are working on same dataset, right? Now let's assume this is updated and committed. Now what will happen in this scenario? The data which is updated by conversation A will be lost and data which is committed by second conversation will be present. So in this scenario we need to decide what to do in such a situations, right? There are 3 chances. Last commit wins, first commit wins, and merging both. Let us talk about each of them. Last commit wins. If last commit wins, what will happen? Whatever changes made by conversation A will be lost and whatever changes you made in conversation B will be present, right? That is not good. And the other strategy is first commit wins. the transaction of conversation A is committed and the user committing transaction conversation B gets a error message, right? This is good. The user must restart the conversation by retrieving the fresh data again, right? So both of them are trying to book seat number 10. He got seat number 10 is booked already, error message he got. Then he should start again searching what all seats available, and again he has to start a fresh conversation. The third one is what? Merging conflicting updates. The first modification is committed in this case, and transaction in conversation B aborts with an error message here also. Second conversation aborts with an error message. But this user need not start from the scratch. Means in the initial stages he might have provided some information. For booking your ticket you need to give your name, age, everything. He did not give all the things. He will start modifying the existing things, and he will try to commit it again. Right? This is again third. But among all, first commit wins is the best strategy. Right? First user whoever updates should be taken into consideration. Second user should get a message. First commit wins is much more attractive. Now how Hibernate will understand, how Hibernate will handle this first commit wins. There are two things. You can think like an optimist or a pessimist. Optimistic means you will think that everything will be okay, nothing will go negative. Pessimist means you will always be negative. You will always think, oh, something will happen, right? If you are following an optimistic strategy, then there are two ways. See here, suppose if this is a class, you need to create a variable called version, and you have to configure this variable version with a version tag and give a separate column, right? Then now see here, I just draw the diagram here. I'll just draw the diagram on the screen. This is a database table. It is having some number of rows, and now we added a column called version. The last column I will name it as version, right? Now let's assume that this is application 1, application 2, or two transactions, right? Now here let's assume that here this is a table for, say, for reservation. It's a table which is having some reservation details. Okay, there will be some primary key. Let's say it is 1, 2, 3. Whenever you insert the row into reservation table, automatically the version will be initially 0. Whenever you make an insert, you need not insert the value for version. You will insert the value for other things. Hibernate, whenever you try to save, whenever it is performing an insert operation on this table, automatically for the first time the version will be 0. Version you are not managing. Right. Now let's assume these two transactions fired a query which will retrieve this row only. Same row. Right? A transaction started, it fetched this row, and this also concurrently started transaction, fetched this row. For both of the objects, assume that this is the object, this is the reservation object which this transaction got, and this is the reservation object which this transaction has got, right? So what will be the version of both? 0 here and then 0 here, right? Now let's assume this transaction has updated this object, updated some other fields, not version, some other fields, and then committed. Means update is fired. Whenever update is fired on this entity, automatically Hibernate will increment the version, right? whenever update is fired, first of all, the update statement checks whether the version is same as whether the version in the database is same as the one in the memory. In memory the value is 0. Here the value is 0. Okay, so it will increase the version to now number 1. Let's assume this transaction has first committed the data. Now the value here will be 1. Okay, I'll just write it here. It should be 1. Now after some time, this transaction has made some changes on same object, old object it was having. The version was 0. Now this transaction will try to update it. Will update this object and it will try to find an update query. What the Hibernate will do is, it will check whether the version in database is same as the version in the object. No, right? Update statement will not be fired, right? So by using version, it will make sure that the user is not. It will make sure that only the first commit wins, right? So this is one of the strategy which is used by Hibernate. Hibernate is not taking locks. Actually, for making sure that concurrency issues will not happen, actual lock has to be taken. But now lock was not taken. It is using a version column to check whether the user is trying to use stale data or working on a correct data. If the user version is 0 here and there on database it is 1, that means that user was working on a stale data, right? So by using versions, Hibernate will check whether you are working on a stale data or not. The columns will be there physically. Physical columns are there. So now Hibernate, what it will do, manage versioning, automatically set the value of version. Forget about timestamp, I will talk about timestamp later. Automatically update the value of version property. It will increment automatically whenever an item is modified. Throw an exception if version has been incremented meanwhile. Means if you are working on stale data, it will throw. Whenever second transaction tries to commit it, it will throw an exception. Use only a single update by default. Whenever it is firing an update, the update query will look like this. It is comparing the version in the object here, where version is equals to, this is the version in the object, right? This is the incremented version, it will try to increment it, right? If this condition is satisfied, then only update is fired, right? Anything else? Now in JDBC, how do you fire an update query? Execute update, right? Execute update method returns the number of rows affected by this query. If the number of rows affected by this query is 0, that means that you are working on stale data. Hibernate will throw an exception, right? So the other way is, instead of using version here, what you can do is you can create an object of type date. Version is of type int. You can create an object of type date and configure here by using timestamp. You have to, instead of using version tag here, you can use timestamp. So these are the two things. You can use either version or timestamp. If you are using version, the variable name should be int. If you are using timestamp, the variable name should be date. Means it will exactly use the timestamp at which the last update has occurred. By using timestamp or version, Hibernate manages the concurrency, right? This is called as managed versioning, right? By using managed versioning or timestamp, Hibernate will optimistically deal with concurrency issues. Why I am saying optimistically? Lock is not taken on the rows whenever user fires a query, right? Or this is one way, right? By using versioning or timestamp. Why do we require? How many times? We need to just check whether we are working on correct data or stale data. How do I know whether I am working on stale data or not? Just we have to know whether you are working on stale data or not. That's it. How do I know? See, the object is having version 0. If the row was this also is having version 0, then we are working on correct data, which was not modified. If the version is different, then this user is working on stale data. Just we have to know whether we are working on stale data or not. We need not know how many times they are submitted. Right? No, only one. You are using both. Why again? Why is my question? Why to use both? Maybe your application wants the count also. How many times it has been updated? It may be your application scenario where they have to maintain the count of how many times this row has been updated. Then you can use version. But then why again timestamp? Not required actually. Both are not required. Logically, if you think also. Timestamp means you will get the time when it is updated, exact time. But versioning, it will just check the numbers, that's all. Hibernate will automatically manage. We are not actually entering the data for version or timestamp. We will never use a variable for this. We will never increment the version variable, or we will never increment the timestamp. Automatically Hibernate will do it.
Maybe because of audit.
Maybe for audit purposes. Suppose if there is a requirement that you need to understand how many times this row has been modified, then you can use versioning. Or if you want to exactly know at what time this last update occurred, then you can use timestamp. It's a choice of you. You can use one, but why your application is using both, I don't know. Okay. Maybe they are storing the user details also inside that. Yeah, maybe they want last update. When was the last update occurred? Okay, you need not use. There is another approach also. You need not use version or timestamp. In this class, you can say optimistic clock is equals to all. This is one thing. Optimistic concurrency can be used without extra columns like version or timestamp. Hibernate will use a word object state to check all columns for modification when updating. Right? The update query here, previously the update query was in the where clause. It was checking the version. Now this update query will check each and every variable of the old object with the one in the database before firing the query. If all the columns are correct, then only the update will be fired, otherwise no. Right? But this is costly because this to compare all the properties. If your database table is having 100 columns, the update statement will contain 100 columns in the where clause, which is not good. And if you are having less number of rows, you can avoid the extra column called version or timestamp. You can use this option, optimistic clock is equals to false. Okay, now pessimistic clocking means whenever you are firing a query, you are so pessimistic and you want to make sure that no other concurrent transaction will work on this row, right? So then you have to take a lock on that row. Like if you see that railway reservation one, indianrail.go.in, what they will do, once you start booking for a particular seat, then that seat will be blocked for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes only they will release the seat. So they are using a pessimistic strategy that will lock that particular seat, right? Why being pessimistic there? Because let us see they are optimistic. Let us understand that they are optimistic. Let's assume that a user comes, he will block a seat number and he will take some 2 minutes for giving his credit card details, right? Now you are using pessimistic strategy, right? What will happen? when the transaction is going to bank, you log into bank site and give your credit card details, right? So now your credit card has been charged, and then control will again come back to your application. But when it comes to your application, let's assume another concurrent user has already booked that seat. Then what they have to do? They have to give that amount back to your bank account, right? So that was a problem. They thought, okay, instead of returning the amount to the bank, they followed a pessimistic approach. They lock it so that no other user can see that row until the lock is released. Right, that's up to your application whether to use pessimistic locking or optimistic locking. If you want to use pessimistic locking, see here. See this example first of all. Here I am having a session factory. Session.get an item with ID 123, right? And then firing the select query. This unit of work executes 2 reads. Here I am saying session.get, and here I am calling a create query, and I am getting the same item. One by using session.get and one by using create query, I got 2 items. But the idea of both of them are same. 1, 2, 3. The unit of work executes 2 reads. First query retrieves an entity instance by identifier, and second read is scalar query, loading the description of already loaded instance. There is a small window in this unit of work which a concurrently running transaction may commit and update it. So before, see here, let's assume one thread is executing this code. After this line is executed, there will be some time slot allocated for each thread. The thread went to sleep mode. In the meanwhile, other thread has updated the item whose ID is 1, 2, 3, right? Now after some time this thread will get a chance, it will start executing from here. Now this description whichever I got, it may be different than the previous object, right? Is it? So now if you want to lock it, what you can do is, if you don't want to face such a problem, see here, after I get session.get 1, 2, 3, after this transaction gets an item, I don't want anyone else to get the same entity and make modifications. So what I am saying is session.lock, and I am specifying the lock mode. Okay, I will talk about lock modes in the next slide. Lock mode at upgrade means I am getting an object for upgrading it or modifying it. So this will explicitly take a lock on the row whose ID is 1, 2. So no concurrent users will be getting the same data, and they will not be able to make updates, right? Now in this case, I am sure that both the descriptions of this item and here whatever I get will be same. So if you want to take a pessimistic lock, you use session.lock method, right? See, these are the various lock modes. Lock mode dot none means whenever you say session.get and specify the lock mode. Here I will just show you the session.get here in one of the things, then I will talk about it. Session.get. See, there is a get method which was taking class and C level, which we are using. There is another get method which is taking lock mode also, right? So whenever I am getting an item, I can specify the lock mode also. I can say take a lock on that row and then get me the data, right? So this is using pessimistic strategy. Now these are the lock modes available. Lock mode.run means I am getting an entity with this lock mode. What it says, session.get should go to database and get it, right? Okay, whenever I say session.get, first Hibernate will check whether that entity is already present in first level cache. If it is not present, it will see whether it is in second level cache if enabled. If it is not there also, then only it will go to the database and fire the query. Normal scenarios. But if I say lock mode.none, don't go to the database until the object is in any cache. So if the object is in any one of the cache, it will get the object from the cache only, because we are saying no need to lock, no need to get a lock. If I say lock mode.none, I am saying no need to get a lock. So it need not go to the database and lock it. So first it will see in caches. If it is available in caches, it will return you the same data. There are two levels of cache. Persistence context or persistence cache is first level cache. And there is second level cache also at session factory level, which we will be discussing next. Whenever there is a persistence context, first level cache. Right. So whenever I am saying session.get by using a lock mode none, I am saying I don't require a lock. So Hibernate need not go to the database also if it is in the cache already. So it will get the object from the cache. So if I say lock mode.none, it will go to the database only if that entity is not present in any one of the caches. Now if I say lock mode.read, means I want to get a read lock. There are various types of locks on database. I want to get a read lock, means it has to go to the database to get a lock. So it will bypass all caches and perform a version check to verify that the object is in memory. Object in memory is same version that currently exists in the database. Now I am asking to get a read. I am just asking to get this entity for reading purpose only. I am not going to update it. So it will go to the database, it will fire a query. Even though your object is in cache, it will go to the database, get the data and compare whether the version in the database is same as the one in the memory. Right. Similarly, upgrade. Whenever you are saying lock mode or upgrade, you are saying that I am going to get this entity for upgrading it. So it will get an upgrade lock, write lock. Okay. And whenever I say upgrade wait, no wait. Generally, if I say I want an upgrade lock, the query will go to database. If already it is locked, it will wait until the lock is released. But if I say upgrade no wait, it will not wait until the lock is released. It will give an exception. Right? Like that is the various lock mode, lock writes. Force means, let us assume that already the row is locked. It will forcefully get a new lock on it. Right? So these are the various lock modes. Write means it will obtain automatically when Hibernate has written. Whenever you say lock mode.write, yeah, upgrade means whenever I fire a select query, it will lock the row and then wait. See, I am saying session.get, means I am getting the data for upgrading. If I say lock mode.upgrade, it will take a lock just after firing a select query. Transaction is still going on. After firing select query, it will immediately get a lock. Right? But if I say lock mode.write, what will happen? I fire a select query now. Right? It will not get a lock now when I fire select query. But after some time I will update it and let's say I flush the session. After some time I updated that object and flushed the session. Means insert query is fired on database. Right? Now when insert query is fired, the row is updated, then it will get a lock until the transaction is completed. Right? So these are the various lock modes for pessimistic lock. Right? You have to use any one of the lock modes if you want to get a pessimistic lock. Or you can use versioning or timestamp for optimistic lock mode. Right? These are the transaction managements. Now the next thing we'll see some of the fetching strategies quickly. Okay, these some of the fetching strategies I have already discussed. You know it most of the times. We'll see some of the new things. Okay. Hibernate defaults to lazy fetching strategy for all entities and collections. If you are saying session.load, are you getting a proxy? Yes, you are getting a proxy. So whenever you say session.load, you are getting a proxy. Means that object, that entity is by default lazily loaded. Load will run a proxy, and the SQL it loads an item isn't executed whenever you say session.load. A proxy is a placeholder that triggers the loading of the red object when it is accessed for the first time. Now tell me, item.getAD will not fire a query, right? But if I say item.get description here, proxy will be initialized, right? This already you know. Now coming again, why do we need a proxy? See here in this case, I want to set a relationship. I have one item and one user. One user may have many items, right? I want to load the entities from database just for setting a relationship. I load item and I loaded user. Then I create a new bit object and setting item and also setting the user. Now tell me what is the reason why I fetched user and item? Just for setting the relationship, right? Just for setting the relationship, why is it needed to fire the query? If I say session.get, it will load the whole object. So if you are loading something for just setting the relationships, then proxy is sufficient. Proxy will have the ID, right? So in this cases, proxy will be advantageous. Session.load is better. So the first point is, whenever you are loading an entity for setting the relationships, don't use session.get. Better to always use session.load. This is the first strategy. Second thing you need to understand. Let's assume, see this scenario. One item has one successful bid. Means there is a one-to-many relationship between successful bid here. One item has one successful bid, right? And one item has set of bids. Here it is one-to-many relationship, right? This is a set and this is an object, reference to entity. And one item is having a seller, and one item has one seller. It is an entity, not a collection. This is also an entity, not a collection. This is a collection, right? Now, if I say session.load, session.get item, session.get I am saying, item will be loaded. I said by default all collections are loaded lazily. So now whenever I say session.get item, will this bit be automatically loaded? Collections are only loaded lazily by default. Collections are only loaded lazily, but entities are not loaded lazily, right? So whenever I say session.get item, bit will be loaded, user will be loaded, user also will be loaded, but set will be proxies. It will be containing proxies. Set will be having only IDs. Only proxies means IDs only, right? So associated entity objects and collections are not loaded away. The proxies carry the identifier value. If I say session.get, these are loaded. If I say session.load item, only identifiers are loaded. Collections are not loaded right away, but we use a term called collection wrapper to describe the kind of placeholder. Hibernate has a set of smart collections that can initialize themselves on demand. As I said, Hibernate has their own collections which can initialize themselves on demand. Hibernate replaces your collections with these. That is why you should use collection interface only in your domain model. Whenever you are creating variables in your domain model, You have always use interface types. You never use concrete type. You should not use a variable type as array list or hash type. The variable type should always be interface type, because Hibernate will replace your collections with its own collections at runtime. Right? The collections used by Hibernate can load themselves dynamically whenever required, whenever we try to access them for the first time. If you go to debug mode, you can see it is persistent list, persistent set, persistent bag. If you go to debug mode, if you keep a breakpoint there, and you can see that it's of type persistent bag or persistent list. Okay. By default, for a collection, what is lazy? Lazy equals to true. By default, lazy equals to true. Right? Means collections are loaded lazily. If I say lazy is equals to false, they are loaded eagerly. Whenever I load an item, automatically all the bits will be loaded. And if I say lazy is equals to extra, we have already discussed. Means if I call methods like extra lazy, yes. If I call on the collection, if I call methods like is empty or contains, right, or list.size, size of the collection, if I try to print, it will not load, right? It will act as extra lazy. We have discussed this option already, right? How to disable proxies? You can disable proxy generation for a particular entity by using lazy is equals to false on an entity. Okay? Disable proxy generation on global level is often too portrayed. Usually you want to disable lazy loading behavior of a particular entity association in fine grain. Eager loading of associations. One item is having one seller of type user. Here you can say lazy is equals to false. Here, if see the difference I am trying to tell. On the class level of user, if I say lazy is equals to false, all the users will be eagerly loaded, right? But now what I want, I don't want all the users to be automatically loaded. Item is having a reference to user. Whenever I get an entity, I want user also to be loaded automatically. Only for this relationship I can say lazy is equals to false. Only for this relationship. This is called as fine grained. Only whenever it is required. Previously, if I configure it at class level, it is called coarse grained. It's for all entities. Now this is only for the entities which are related to this item. Any doubts? Similarly, for eagerly loading collections, for set you can say lazy is equals to false, which will eagerly load all the collections. Any doubts see here? This all we already know almost. Now selecting a fetching strategy. Now see here. See, in this case, just see, I will try to talk case by case. In this case, I am loading an item whose ID is 1, 2, 3. That should not get. This will for a select query, right? If you access any proxied association, if item is having a bit, then only it will try to load that bit. If you try to access that bit, then only it will try to load that bit. If you access any proxy association or uninitialized collection, a second select query will be fired. Right? By selecting a good fetching strategy, you can reduce the number of on-demand selects. just I'll show you quickly here. Already we have the code. In bidirectional here, did I change anything here? Okay, I think yesterday when I was giving a demo, I changed the list, set to list. Okay, just I'll quickly do it. Already it's there. Okay. Now see this relationship. One user is having set of accounts and one bank account is having one user. One user. Bidirectional one to many. One bank account is having one user. Now what I'll do is I'll try to fetch a bank account by using a particular ID. Let us see how many queries will be fired. Session dot get bank account dot class, comma, what is the ID I gave already? There are two back 4001 I'll say. I will get a bank account object. Now tell me how many queries will be fired. Will it get the associated user also? Let us see. It fired only for bank account. It didn't get the associated user. Right? If I want the associated user also to be got automatically, here I can say lazy is equals to false, means it should be eagerly loaded. It is eagerly loaded, right? So by default associations are loaded lazily. If you want eagerly loading of that particular association, you can specify lazy for that association only, right? But there is also another possibility. At the user level, at the class level, I can make it lazy is equals to false. So all the users by default will be eagerly loaded, which is not what we require. So configuring this will be coarse grained for all users. We may not want it. So always it is better to give at a association level in many to one time, right? Okay. Now here I made this as I removed that lazy. If I try to access a dot get user, will it fire the select query now? We will get a proxy, and if I try to print it or use it, then only it will be fired. I'll try to print it, then it should fire, right? So two are fired, right? So by default associations are loaded lazily, right? Now see this scenario. I am filing from item, means let's assume that there are 10 items in my database, right? Each item may have a successful bid, right? Now I am passing each item 0, item 1, item 2, this method, process seller. Okay, in this method assume that it is trying to act as a seller of this item, right? It's trying to process. Now in this, whenever each method is called, in this method I am passing each item, and this item corresponding bid is accessed, right? In this case, tell me, this method will result in a query which will get that user, right? Proxy will finish test. Here proxy will finish test. Here proxy will finish test. So 3 times I called. Totally, how many queries are fired for all these 4? Here 1 query will be fired for this, right? And here 1 query will be fired to get the corresponding user. Another query, 3 queries are fired, right? Now, by selecting a good fetching strategy, what we can do is we can reduce the number of such queries. Here 4 queries are fired, right? Now let us see. I'll tell you a fetching strategy. What you can do is, on the user table, you can say batch size equals to some batch size 10, right? Now, what it will do is, whenever you try to get first user, it will get 10 users. It will get 10 users automatically. Here in this query, it might have got 10 items. It might have got 10 items, right? So in the second query itself, it will get all the users for all the items. So by specifying a batch size, you can reduce the number of queries to accordingly. Suppose if this select query for items return 20 items, how many select queries are now required? See, 1 for fetching the items. I got 20 items. I said batch size is 10, right? Whenever I try to access the first user, it will get 10 users automatically. If I try to access 11th user, another query will be fired, right? So here, by specifying the batch size, we are reducing the number of queries being fired. Yeah, you can give as much as you want. According to your application, you can specify whatever batch size, right? No queries are fired. For the first time, see here, for the first time whenever you got items, you got 20 items. For each item there is a user. So here at this line, when this query is fired, at this line, 10 items, 20 items are got. Each item will be having a proxy to the user. Whenever you try to access the first proxy of the first item, it will get the 10. It will fetch 10. So number of queries will be reduced. By default, you get a proxy only. Whenever you try to initialize first proxy, then automatically it will get the 10 items, 10 users into the memory batch. Or for fetching collections also, you can specify the batch size. Instead of specifying lazy is equals to false. If I say lazy is equals to false, what happens? If the size of the set is now 100 will be loaded, but now it will be loaded in batches, right? So we can specify batch fetching for collections also. Now another thing, for the set, if I say subselect, one item has number of bits, right? If I say item dot get bits, what will happen? If I don't write like this, if I say item dot get bits, it will fire a separate query. Hibernate now initializes all bit connections, loaded them as objects as soon as you for the initialization of bits. It does that by rerunning the first initial query in a modified way. So see here, it is using a subquery, subselect query for getting it. Any doubts? The next one is fetch join. See here in this relationship, one item is having one seller. Is that? In our previous case also, in our example also, there was a many to one relationship. What happened when if I say lazy is equals to false? If I say lazy is equals to false, how many queries are fired? Two queries are fired or one query is being fired? No. No, see here, I will specify lazy is equals to false, right? And now I will run. First I got the bank account and trying to get user. Okay, even if I don't say get user, how many will be? Two queries. Now will it fire one query or two queries? Lazy is equals to false, means eager fetching. Two queries will be fired. Two queries. Again this is costly. Two queries are costly. Now I'll say instead of lazy is equals to false, I will say fetch is equals to join. Now let us see what will happen. How many queries are fired? Only for one query by using inner join it has got. Right? This is another fetching strategy. Fetch is equals to join. Instead of saying lazy is equals to false, you can always say fetch is equals to join for relationships. No, this is actually inner join. Inner join, not outer join. If it is outer join, you have to specify left or right. This is inner join. Why do we require? Actually, when you are configuring for relationships, you want to get the matching cell only, right? Matching cell means it should be an inner join always. When you are using join, it is eager loading only. When you say fetch is equal to join, it is eagerly loading. Fetching collections. For collections also you can specify fetch is equals to join. So it will use a inner join query to fetch all the collection details also. Right? A single query. Huh? This is for a collection. There it was for a many to one relationship, I said. This is for a many to one relationship. It should get only the matching seller for this item. Here it is inner query, but here it is a collection. Where is it? Here it is a collection. Now I want to get actually all the bits, even though the items are not having bits. I want to get all. So left out join should be used. I want to get items even though there are no bits. So left out join has to be used. Right? This is better than saying lazy is equals to false. Fetch is equals to join, because it is internally using joins. No need of separate queries. Okay. See here, let's assume a scenario. One item has a one bit, right? And one bit has a bidder, and that user has the shipping address. So relationship is chain, right? If I enable lazy is equals to fetch is equals to join, what will happen? It is using outer joins. Using outer joins for getting all the details, right? So as the number of outer joins increases, it is not good. The number of tables joined in this case, if the number of outer joins are increasing, then it is not good, right? The queries will be too complex if more than 2 outer joins are there. It is not encouraged to write outer joins, more outer joins. So the number of tables joined in this case depends upon the configuration max fetch depth. You can specify maximum fetch depth, which will specify maximum number of outer joins that can be used. You can give anything usually between 1 and 5. More than 5 is not good. You may even disable join fetching for many to one and one to one resolution by specifying the property to 0. Right? You can specify join fetch is equal to join by giving the value for this max underscore fetch underscore depth as 0. Now no outer joins will be performed at all.
So if I am giving that property equal to
3. Maximum number of outer joins which are allowed is 3.
So if I will try to join 4 to 7, then it will
For,
only
no. It will get the details by performing another additional query. It will maximum try to give only 3 outer joins. But if there is 4th one also, then it will try to perform another extra query to get the data. It will not use only single query. Okay. The last thing, in our table per subclass strategy, table per subclass means is it in normalized form or not? One table per subclass. They are having joins. All the tables are using foreign keys. Okay, let me show you table per subclass here. For example, disk table, video disk, audio disk. When it is using table per subclass, we are using join subclass, and we are specifying a table name for each class, right? Every class will be having a table, and they are having a foreign key relationship. Is it right? Now if I fire a query, select query, I am firing from disk. It has to get all the disks. So how many tables it has to join? 3 outer joins only. Let us see the query which is generated. See, it is left outer join. It is joining using left outer join audio disk, video disk, and disk, right? As I said, now outer joins, more number of outer joins are not good. Here in this case there are only 2 subclasses. What if this class has 5 subclasses or 6 subclasses? 6 outer joins will be performed, which is not good, right? So this mapping can also be changed slightly. This mapping can be changed slightly to avoid the joins. Let us see how it is. Yep, see, what we can do is we can use a subclass. Tell me, if I am using subclass tag, tell me what is the strategy? Which strategy did I use subclass? Table per class hierarchy. In table per class hierarchy I used subclass. In table per class hierarchy there will be only single table. But how to distinguish between each thing? By using discriminator column. So now the idea is to use the combination of both the strategies. See here, I am using class and subclass. Class name is credit card, and discriminator value for credit card will be CC. So now the superclass billing details will be having discriminator column, billing underscore details underscore, right? Where value will be CC for credit card and BA for bank account, the subclasses, right? going to specify the table. Inside it I am specifying the joint table. Joint table is equals to credit card. And now I am telling about the fetch is equals to select. Means I am telling whenever you have to fetch, you fire a separate select query. Right? Here also I am having three tables: credit card table, bank account table, and superclass. Each table they are also joined by using foreign keys. Right? But here we are using a combination of this. If we use a combination of it, now see here, it is firing a select query for each credit card. Only discriminator column. Where redundant values are there? Superclass will be the table. The superclass table will be having only the columns of superclass only. Here we are not specifying any properties here. We are specifying joint table. If I am specifying property tag, this property goes inside the table. I am specifying a joint table. So here whatever I mentioned will go inside this table only. Right. So during inheritance, you can use a combination of both the strategies to avoid the number of outer joins. Here in this case, whenever I say fetch is equal to select, for credit card table I specified fetch is equal to select, and for account table I specified fetch is equal to join. So whenever I fire a query, it will join bank account with billing details and get the details of both. But for getting credit card, it will fire a separate select query. Right? See now how the queries are if I fire a select query. For it is joining billing detail and bank account, because I said fetch is equal to join there. But firing a separate select query for credit cards. Right? So here you can reduce the fetch depth by using a combination of these two strategies. Okay. These are the fetching strategies. And one more thing. Yeah, see here last thing. This query will get all the items, list of all items, right? I am iterating through each item and calling get bits. How many queries will be fired now? Let's say I have 10 items. 10 items I have. For this one query will be fired, and in the loop I am getting all the bits. Whenever I say get bits, it will try to get the bits of that item. So here it will under select query, right? So if there are 10 items, how many queries are fired totally? 11. So this is the n plus 1 problem. N plus 1 selects. If one item has, if this query results in n items, totally n plus 1 selects are fired in this case. Right? If you want to avoid it, avoid n plus 1 selects, one of the solutions is to give the batch size. It will reduce the number of selects from n plus 1 to n by 10 plus 1. This is one strategy, is to give batch size. And the next strategy is to give fetch is equal to subselect. With subselect based prefetch, you can reduce the number of selects to exactly 2. Means it will use a subselect query for getting all the bits. What do I mean by subselect? See here, when I say from item, I will get list of all items. Suppose I got 10 items. Okay? Whenever I try to access the first item here in this case, first item not get bits I fire, it will select all the bits for all the items which are retrieved here in the list. If I say which is equal to subselect. Just see this. Which is equal to subselect. If I say, I am saying it for a sub-select query. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Now, see just I'll explain it sequentially. From the item dot list I said. So if you fire select query for getting all the items, select star from item table. It will fire. Now, I am trying to, for the first time, whenever it is in the loop for the first time, I am trying to call first items dot get bits. So now in this case, what it will do is it will fire a query, select star from bit table. It will get all the bits where bit ID bit table is having item in, right? Item underscore ID of the bit table. B dot item ID in select item ID. It will use the same query as the inner query, subquery. Select item underscore ID from same query. Select item underscore ID means you get all the items. Which item ID is of all the items which you got in the previous query. Right? So it requires that query. Sub-select, it requires sub-select. Let us see the example. We already have the example. Let us just modify that example. I'll show you clearly. One-to-many bidirectional I am using. Yeah, for the set I will configure fetch is equals to sub-select. One user is having a set of accounts. Fetch is equals to sub-select. First I will do again. Let us run this. Session dot get. I will get user dot class. What is the value I give? 4. I will get a user whose ID is 4. Then for the first time I will say try to print system.out.println us dot get bank accounts. I have to fire a select query, right? Not get. I have to fire session dot create query from user dot list. I will get a list of users is equals to. Then quickly I will go through each of this loop for user us is a user us colon users system.out.println. I will just try to print us dot get accounts, right? Now see this. What is the query being fired? First it fired select query for all the users. Then it is firing query on the bank account table, and it is firing subquery, right? See, it is using a subquery. When it is firing subquery, it is select user ID. Previously I fired all users. This is one query. When it is trying to get the first account for the first time in the loop, it is trying to initialize that accounts, right? It is firing a subselect, which will fetch all the related accounts which are required inside this query. Same query as here. Okay, I'll just modify here the query from user, where from user u, where u dot what user is having, u dot name is equals to u dot name, like u dot name is equals to something a. Okay, let us see the query. We are interested in queries. Oh, what is the user name I introduced? What is the user name? X, right? I will write user dot name is equals to. It didn't go inside the loop right now, that's why it didn't get printed. See, here is one query is fired by using the condition also. In the inner query, is it the same query but using only? So same query is fired as above query, but it will fetch only the IDs, and it is using in the as the inner query, right? So that's about fetch is equals to subselect. Now if I say fetch is equals to select, now I will run it. See, it is firing separate select statement for each account. There are 2 accounts for that. Right. And if I say fetch is equals to join, what will happen? Item, these 2 tables will be joined using which join? Outer join or inner join? No, whenever it is for a set, it is outer join. If it is for a many to one relationship, it is inner join. Now I will run it, it will use the join. No. If I say fetch is equals to join, it is turning off lazy loading, which is not allowed. But fetch is equal to join should perform as join, right? Okay, fetch is equals to join. Just actually fire a join query. What is firing? Separate query. So it is acting just like select query. One query for user and one query for of the backup. Here I said don't use this fetch is equal to join because it cannot load. I need to check with it. Or one more thing is instead of doing this at fetch, instead of specifying this fetch mode in the XML itself, we can specify the fetch mode in the query also, which is advised always. If you are specifying in XML, it will be applicable for all. Instead of this, you can specify that in a query. Right? These are the things. These are the various fetching strategies. And you know, hibernate.initialize to explicitly initialize a proxy. So the next thing we'll see at caching. Okay, as you know, there are two levels of caching: first level cache and second level cache. Caching scopes. Transaction scope cache. This cache is attached to the current unit of work, which may be a database transaction or even a conversation. It is valid as long as the unit of work runs. Every unit of work has its own cache. Transaction scope cache is nothing but first level cache, the session object. Right? If you are using JTA transactions, tell me, session is closed as automatically as soon as transaction is closed, transaction is completed. So first level cache is nothing but we say it as transaction scope cache. And another one is process scope cache. Now tell me, once your web application starts, suppose if you are using Hibernate in a web application, once your web application starts, generally session factory is created only once, right, for your whole application. Can I say that if I'm starting my server, application server, is it a process? Whenever I start my application server, a new process starts, the JVM process. Inside that, your servlet container is one thread, EJB container is one thread, everything is a thread. The application server itself is a process, right? So for our application level, we have a process scope cache. Now let's assume that we have web application, right? In web applications, we will be generally creating one session factory, right? A cache which is scoped to that session factory level is also called as process level cache, shared between many concurrent units of transactions. So in our application, we can start n number of transactions. All those transactions will be sharing same cache. This is called as process level cache. This means that data in the process scope cache is accessed concurrently by the running threads, concurrently running threads. Obviously, implications on transaction isolation level. In our application, let's assume that there are some 10 sessions which are parallelly running. 10 threads are running. 10 threads. Generally, whenever new request comes to our web application, a new thread is started. Right? 10 threads are started. Generally, for every request, what we do, we get a session, we get a Hibernate session, and then we find the queries on that session. Right? So at a particular time, let's assume that there are 10 threads. These 10 threads will be opening 10 sessions. Right? So cache associated with these sessions is said to be in which scope? Generally, if you are using JTA transactions, every session will be having a first level cache, right? So every session will be having a first level cache. This is a first level cache. Object, let's assume first level cache. And all these sessions are coming from one session factory. So at session factory level, I will be having a second level cache. Generally, for one application, one factory is there, and for one factory, one cache, right? So now, whenever we say session.get, I said it will see whether that entity is present inside the first level cache. If not, if second level cache is enabled, then second level cache, right? So this cache, is it shared by all the sessions, right? Means for each session we will be generally starting a transaction. For each session there will be one transaction, right? So now the data present inside the second level cache can be concurrently accessed by each transaction. Concurrently accessed by each transaction, right? So tell me, is it thread safe? Session fact, the second level cache, is it thread safe? No, it is not thread safe, because more than one transaction is concurrently accessing, right? So there may be problems of isolation. Isolation problems may be present whenever we are using second level cache. Tell me, isolation issues will occur in first level cache or not? No, for first level cache only one transaction for one session at a particular point of time there will be only one transaction. So the data in session cannot be accessed concurrently by two transactions, right? So isolation issues are possible in case of first level cache? No. In case of second level cache, isolation issues are possible because concurrent transactions may be accessing the data from the second level cache, right? So second level cache is nothing but we call it as process scope cache, right? First level cache is transaction scope cache. Second level cache is process scope cache. But another scope is also there, cluster scope. Your application might be running in clusters, right? Again, this is cluster scope, right? Shared between multiple processes on the same machine or built between multiple machines. Here, network communication is an important point, right? These are three types of caches available. Yes, there are disadvantages because more than one transaction is trying to access a cache, right? There are isolation issues possible. Means isolation again, if I talk about isolation again, locking will reduce the performance, right? So second level cache is not good for data which is updated mostly, right? Because concurrent transactions will be sharing the same cache, right? There are a lot of issues possible when using second level cache. If you are having read-only data, then second level cache is good.
How do you actually, for example, since I have load, I'll see when the page is loading, I have some value that is to be loaded each time.
Okay.
So I want to keep it in a second level memory so that I don't want to repeat the database to get the loading value each time.
Yes.
So how do you actually do it?
Yes. Now you have to decide. Second level cache is not enabled by default. Right. I'll talk about this. Okay. Anyway, let me answer the question. Second level cache is not enabled by default. You have to enable selectively. And if you enable second level cache also, and if you have some 20 classes, 20 entities in my database, second level cache will not be enabled for 20 entities. You have to specify for each class. You have 20 entities. You have to specify for this entity is second level cache enabled or not. So at entity level you have to specify whether second level cache is enabled for this entity or not, right? So if you have to decide whether for a particular entity second level cache should be enabled or not, you have to ask a question: is this a read-only data, or will there be lot of updates on this table? If your answer is yes, means if you are performing most of the read-only operations and very less update operations on this table, then this class is eligible for second level caching. Otherwise, second level cache, it is not eligible for second level caching. If you enable it, then there will be a performance hit, right? Because locks will be taken, right? Okay, anyway, let me make it clear. First, at this point of time, what I want you to understand is there are three scopes of caches, right? Transaction scope cache is nothing but first level cache, and process level cache is nothing but second level cache, right? We'll talk about these two caches right now. Hibernate has two level cache architecture. First level cache is nothing but the persistence context. I told you every session will be having a persistence context. This is at the unit of work level, means it is at the transaction level, right? It corresponds to one session in Hibernate for a single request and is by default enabled. First level cache is by default enabled. First level cache is mandated. It's by default enabled. Second level cache is either at process scope level or at cluster scope level, right? second level cache, whenever I am using second level cache, more than one concurrent transaction might be using the data inside second level cache. So we have to enable isolation levels, right? Means a cache concurrency strategy defines the transaction isolation details of a particular item of data. Means whenever you are using second level cache, you need to tell what isolation level. There are 4 isolation levels, right? What isolation level has to be enabled for this cache, because concurrent transactions will be using it, right? Now, using second level cache, the cache policy involves this on whether second level cache is enabled. First of all, by default it is not enabled. You have to enable it. First thing is you have to enable second level cache. Then if the second level cache is enabled, the concurrency strategy means what isolation level has to be used, has to be configured. This is second thing you have to do. Third thing is, when the cache expires, the cache will expire at some point of time, right? Otherwise, if the cache will not expire, you may be working on stale data, right? So you need to tell about cache expiration policies. Means there should be a maximum timeout for the cache, after which you can say the cache is invalidated. You can invalidate the cache, right? And also the fourth one is where the cache should be stored. Whether the cache should be in memory, or it should be in indexed files, or it should be replicated inside clusters also. These are all the things you need to tell, you need to configure when you are configuring the second level cache. We will see one by one slowly, right? Okay, as I said, transactional concurrency strategies to enable isolation levels. These are the 4 concurrency strategies. If you are using concurrency strategy with name transactional, then it is equivalent to isolation level repeatable read, right? If you are using read write, this maintains read committed isolation level. Means they gave some 4 names to strategies. If your concurrency strategy name is transactional, it is equivalent to repeatable read isolation level. If it is read write, it is equivalent to read committed isolation level. Non-strict read write, it is equivalent to some other level. Read only. So each strategy is equivalent to one of the isolation level. They define these 4 names. Then coming here, second level cache, Hibernate uses, these are the caching providers. Hibernate does not develop their own caching system. Hibernate is not using their own caching system for configuring second level cache. It is using some third party caching system. There are a lot of pre-built caching systems already available in the market. So Hibernate integrates with one of the caching systems. Hibernate does not have its own caching system, second level caching system, right? Hibernate uses existing caching systems. These are the caching providers for Hibernate. Hash table cache provider, EH cache provider, OS cache provider, JBoss cache, Swamp cache, right? And if you want to configure EH cache, you have to use this class name. And this cache supports caching in memory as well as caching in disk. And here it says, is it cluster safe? Can it be used in clusters? Yes. Right? The most commonly used caching provider is EH cache provider. Okay? Most commonly. So I'll show you an example of how to integrate Hibernate with EH cache. Not supporting transaction, why? It supports. Transactional caching, yes. Here it is. EH cache is supporting these all transaction levels. Transactional caching is not supported by this one. Only JBoss cache supports this one. But which is better? Always No. Which isolation level is better? I told read committed. Read committed is better, right? Depending upon scenario, you can specify others also. But read committed. Read committed means what? Read committed means read write. Read write is supported by EHCache. Many of us use EHCache. Okay, now I'll show you how to use EHCache. Right? Now, first of all, before coming to this, one minute. Yeah, I'll come back to this. First step you have to do is, if you have to enable second level cache, first step is you have to configure this property cache provider value as whatever cache provider. I said for each cache this is a class, right? I showed you in the table. You have to configure this. Then your application will turn on the second level cache. If this is not configured, second level cache is disabled. If this property cache provider class is not provided, second level cache is disabled. So you have to set this cache.provider class first to enable second level cache. Any notes? Okay, next. Next thing you need to understand here. As I said, if there are 20 entities in my application, for some of the tables, every class has a corresponding table, right? For some of the tables, you might be updating those tables frequently, right? Those tables for which updates are made on the tables frequently are not eligible for second level caching. The tables which has read only data mostly is eligible for second level caching. So you need to enable caching on class level. If you have 20 classes, all 20 classes are not eligible, right? Maybe some 5 classes are eligible for second level caching, right? So now the data for each class is shared in a region called as cache region. Now tell me, whenever I am using second level cache can be maintained in memory or in the file system, right? In the memory also, our memory for allocated for second level cache is divided into regions, right? Is divided into regions. Now, suppose you decided that among 20 entities in your application, only 5 classes are eligible for second level cache. Now, what you have to do is you have to specify for this class what is the cache region name. For one class, one cache region will be present, right? So cache regions are handles by which you can reference the class. You can reference classes and collections in cache provider. Cache regions are the place where the cache data is actually stored, right? For 5 classes you have 5 class regions, right? So each class region holds the data of that particular class only, right? Regions are nothing but buckets of data. Just we can represent the regions as a bucket. One type contains, okay, there are 2 types of buckets, 2 types of class regions, not basically 2 types. One is class cache region, and another thing is for collections. For collections, separate cache regions are maintained, and for classes, separate class regions are maintained, right? And also for queries, a separate cache region is also maintained, right? There are basically 3. One cache region for class, and for collections we use a separate class region, and for queries separate cache region, right? So there are 3 types of cache regions: class cache, collection cache, query cache, right? By default, query caching is not enabled. Means if you fire a SQL query, the result of that is not cached by default. If you want to enable query caching, we have to enable that by using hibernate.cache.use query cache to true. Or you can say query dot set cache. Programmatically you can enable by using set cache equal to true. So only the result of this query will be cached, right? Query cache is on second level cache only. Query cache is not inside the first level. Query cache is on second level cache only. Yes, query cache is not by default enabled. After enabling second level cache, we have to set this also, right? And also for the query, you have to set query dot set cache equal to true. Three things you have to do. You have to enable second level cache, you have to write this property, and also set cache equal to true. Then only that results of that query will be cached. Otherwise, queries will not be cached. So results of a particular query will go inside a query cache region, right? Okay. Now, to explain clearly about the advantages of first level cache and second level cache, I'll talk about the regions slowly. But let's see this example. How many queries are fired here in this case? In this case, 1 or 2. I'm getting same ID. ID is same, and I am using same session. One query. Whenever I use session dot get, this query will be fired, and the book object is in first level cache. Second time, whenever I say, it will get it from the cache. If you inspect the SQL segments enabled, you find that only one database query is fired. That means that Hibernate is caching your objects in same session. This kind is called as first level caching. And its scope is okay. Next, let us see the next thing. Here, I opened one session and I got a book in that the first session. Closed the session, and I opened second session and find the same query. How many queries? 2 queries. 2 database queries. If you want a single one, then you need to turn on second level caching, whose scope is session factory. Second level cache scope is session factory at factory level. Right. Now to enable it, the first one is this one. Right. Then you have to provide. You are using EHCache provider, right? For EHCache provider, you need to write a file called ehcache.xml and keep it inside the class path. And the ehcache.xml will be like this. The root tag is ehcache, and as I said, ehcache can be stored in memory, and also it can flow to disk also, overflow to disk also, right? And here, see, this is the default cache, right? Default cache, and this is the cache name. Forget about default cache for some time now. This is the cache. What is the name of the cache? It is pointing to a class. So this is how to specify the class cache region. Class cache region. This specifies a region called class cache region with this name. Name of the class cache is this one, same as the qualified class name of this class. And here here I am configuring maximum elements in the memory is 10,000, and eternal is equal to false, and time to idle seconds means if this cache is idle for 300 seconds, this will be expired, and time to leave seconds, maximum seconds before the cache can expire is 600. If it is idle for 300 seconds, it will be automatically expired. Even if it is not idle also, maximum time to live is 600. Overflow to disk, true. Means if the size is not, if the memory is not available, it can go to disk also. Like this, we have to configure EHCache, right? And for enabling logging for second level cache, you can enable this debug level in log4j properties. Then when you enable a class with second level cache, Hibernate doesn't actually store the instances in the cache. Instead, it caches the individual properties of that object. Now you need to understand here, in second level cache, objects are not stored. Only the values of that objects are stored. For example, the instance of book is not cached in second level. Rather, its properties in the book object like name, price are cached. The cached objects are stored in a region that has the same name as persistent class com.training. Right. So to enable caching for an entity, you have to use a tag called cache. Usage is equals to read only. What is this read only? This is nothing but the transaction strategy which I showed you. I showed you a lot of 4 transaction strategies. Yeah, transactional, read write, non-strict read write, read only, right? So these are the values. So if you want to enable for a particular class, you have to do like that. Yeah, here I am specifying to use read only concurrency strategy for that class. Then only if I write this tag, then only this is eligible for second level cache, right? Where are the entities of this book stored in which cache region? Tell me. If the whole package name of the book is com.infinite.book, the class cache region name is com.infinite.book. That cache region we have to define in which file? ehcache.xml. We have to write a cache tag for that class with that same name and we have to configure it, right? Then now in this case, how many queries are fired now? If second level cache is enabled by following those steps? Only one, because second level cache is enabled and second level cache scope is factory. We are getting the sessions, both sessions from same factory, so only one query will be fired. Now see here, for this book, what we said the cache usage? Read only. Means you are telling that this book, we will do only read operations on the book. If you try to update that book, then what will happen? See, I got the book from the session, updating the book and flushing. If you model the book in session and flush the changes, an exception will be thrown for updating the read only object. Right? You cannot. If you want to avoid that, you can use a strategy called as read write. So according to the usage, if a particular object is used only for firing, read operations, then you have to use read only. Otherwise, you can use this for read write. Right? Whenever you update an object, Hibernate invalidates that object from the cache before it is updated. So once you fire an update query, the query will go to database, right? Before firing the query, object is already present in second level cache, that will be invalidated. So we will not work with stale data. So you can invalidate either one instance or all instances. This will evict all the instance of book from the second level cache. This will evict only a book with this ID, right? And similarly, evict entity. These both are same. Here we are giving book.class. Here we are giving the whole name. So this is how to evict. Suppose you have enabled second level cache, but for a particular scenario you want to ignore the second level cache. You can still do that by using cache mode.ignore. For this session, whatever operations will do, you are doing, that will not interact with second level cache. and these are the various cache modes and their meanings. Right there, you can just see the API also for cache modes and their meanings. Caching associations. See now, you are configuring second level cache for book. Is a book associated with publisher? Books associated with publisher cached when parent is cached? There are two classes, publisher class and book class. You have enabled second level cache for book, and book is having a relation to publisher. Now, publisher also will be stored inside second level cache or not? No. You have to enable for that publisher also. You have to enable for that publisher also. Right? If you initialize association in two different sessions, it is learned many times. So this is because Hibernate caches only the identifier of the books region. Right? See, when book is cached, book is having a reference to publisher, right? So in second level cache, book object will be there, but book will be having a reference to only the publisher's ID only. If you want the publisher objects also to be stored, what you have to do? You have to enable caching for publisher also, and this publisher will be stored in its own cache region or not? Publishers will be stored inside its own cache region. Now, see here, book is having its own cache region. This is a cache region for book. Object of book is present, and book is having a publisher. Here only the primary key of the publisher will be stored, and if you have enabled second level caching for publisher, the publisher will be stored in its own second level cache. Right? And for collections, you have to separately enable for collections. Okay? Factory, okay, this is a way to enable second level cache for collections. Now tell me, if I am enabling second level cache for collections, in collections, will there be actual objects? One book is having here set of chapters. For book I have enabled caching. For chapters also I have enabled caching. So, if the book object is stored inside this its own cache region, in the book class region, in the book object, it will be having references of these chapters, right? These chapters will be actually stored in collection cache. Collections will be having a separate cache region, but their only identifiers are stored, actual objects are not stored, right? Here in this set, in the collection cache region, only identifiers of these entries will be stored, right? Again, if for chapters again, if second level cache is enabled, chapters will go into their own cache region. In collection cache region, I remember that only identifiers will be stored, right? So this is how to enable query cache region. Already I told you, by enabling cache dot use query cache to true, this will enable the query cache, right? We already saw this. By default it will create. See, there is a default cache region, right? Yeah, default cache is there, right? There to be stored. See, if there are 5 entities which you identified for eligible for second level cache, but you wrote the cache tag only for 2, let's assume. For 3 you didn't specify separate cache region. They will go into default cache region. You can You can specify separate cache region, but it's not mandatory. Otherwise, you go to default cache region.
So once the data gets extracted from cache region, then the data is pulled back and loaded into cache region.
Okay. Now tell me, when is the data coming into second level cache? This is the question. Now there are 10 concurrent transactions running, right? In any one of the sessions, you will fetch the data. It will be first stored in first level cache. Whenever you close this first level cache, then only the data present in first level cache will be transferred to second level cache. So fetching will not happen automatically. You have to fetch it in one of the sessions. When you close the session, automatically it will come to second level cache, and this will be available to other sessions also, other transactions also, right? And tell me, are the objects on the second level cache locked? No. They are specifying concurrency strategy, right? According to the strategy specified, they are locked in memory. Hibernate is implementing locking in memory only. Second level cache objects in second level cache will be locked according to the transaction strategy you select. Right? Any other doubts? Okay, any doubts?